Hello, hello, and a very warm welcome back to The Library is Open. So I hope you've brought your library card. Massive welcome to anyone who's watching for the first time, and also anyone who's watching for the, insert number time. I value you all very much, and thank you for being here. It really is lovely. Got my cup of tea, my big cup of tea, in the mug that clearly I have no right to be using. 18 and ready to party. Times what? But it is a big mug. I have an idea it holds a pint actually, which is, that's the kind of tea drinking vessel that I really want in my life. So, you join me today on an unseasonably warm morning. Well, early afternoon. Alright, mid-afternoon, I've just realised you see the clock in the background, to discuss another book, obviously. What would that be in the point of this channel? And this is a book that I was not planning on discussing originally, just because I sort of have this thing with books that I read. I try to choose things that I have a lot to say about, or try and, mix it up a little bit so we're getting a sort of wide range of the different genres that I read, and a kind of as representative as possible, which, I mean, sometimes that's possible, sometimes that's not, depending on what I've read at the time and, needing to make new content to talk about. But, so I hadn't originally planned to make a video about this, but having completed it, it wasn't what I expected, not in a bad way. And thus, I wanted to talk a little bit about it because I had some thoughts and feelings. So without further ado, let me introduce you to the book, and it's called What Red Was by Rosie Price. I am just about to sneeze, which I will now do. Yeah, it was just the once. And this is obviously the paperback edition. I think this came out at it was either the start of this year or the beginning of last year, so either 2019, 2020, we'll just check that. Yeah, last year, and the paperback was this year. And I'd seen it in the hardback edition and been interested because I knew that it dealt in some ways with ideas around class, which I'm very interested in, as like a topic or a theme. But I just sort of never got around to reading it, and then I needed to make up some money to get free delivery from Waterstones, if I'm honest, and I thought I'll take a chance on it. So let me just talk to you a little bit about what the blurb says, or rather what the story is, and then how it deviated from what I expected, but in quite an intriguing way. So on the back we have, when Kate meets Max in the first week of university, a life-changing friendship begins. Over the next 4 years the two become inseparable. But loving Max means knowing his family, the wealthy Rippons, all generosity, social ease, and quiet repression. Theirs is not Kate's world, and yet she finds herself drawn quickly into their gilded lives, and the secrets that lie beneath. Until one summer evening at the Rippons' home, just after graduation, her life is shattered in a bedroom while a party goes on downstairs. So, that doesn't give everything away, and I will discuss it a little bit further. So, what I think drew me towards reading this now is, obviously with it being the start of the new term and I work in university, I was like, oh okay, let's get my head back in the game, read something about university education and so on and so forth, try and put myself back in, although this is fiction, the mindset of a student who, particularly at this time, during these conditions, that's a lot, particularly for freshers or freshmen, as you would say in America, what that experience looks like under the current pandemic. So I was there, and I think I'm not sure. I suppose I expected a story like a campus novel, with the sort of social class of because Kate, one of our protagonists, comes from a working class background with a single mother, Max, who's the other character she befriends, is from an upper class background. They're, essentially property landowners, so on and so forth. This sort of quite gentrified family, I suppose. Gentrified is the wrong word. A family of, influential people who have money, basically. Let's call it that. And to be fair, that is what we do get. But when it takes the twist, which maybe you can guess from the blurb, and this is a content warning as well, it actually becomes more about an event that takes place in a bedroom. So this novel does take place with another member of Max's family, Lewis, who is a doctor, who's just become a doctor. He's been a student doctor, and then he qualifies as the novel progresses. And there is a sexual assault and the ramifications of that, which kind of permeate throughout the book. So that is a content warning. Another bit of content warning, there is also scenes of self-harming and suicidal thoughts. So if any of those are perhaps content triggers for you, maybe that's, just best to be forewarned, I suppose. Although in no way are they in any way gratuitous, they all make sense with the plot. And they're all very sensitively handled without being asinine or, you know, sort of neutered in any way. So, which is great, and that's a hard act to get, particularly for, this is Rosie Price's debut novel, as I understand. Yes, it's her debut novel, so to be able to pull that off is quite an achievement. So, a couple of things that I really, really enjoyed about this. I enjoyed, first and foremost, the relationship of Kate and Max, who are, you know, when it sort of starts off, you get the idea that this is going to be set up as a kind of typical rom-com, because they kind of meet in like an anti-meet cute, where she's quite lonely at university and unsure of how to approach, you know, making friends and so on and so forth, which, you know, I'm sure is a consideration for a lot of people. I think when the character of Max is introduced and they instantly become close, there's kind of that idea that they're probably going to become romantically involved, or at least sexually involved, even if it's like a one-off. But actually that never happens, and what it looks at instead is a kind of love between two people that is not based on either necessarily on physical attraction, although there is an attraction of sorts, but then I believe that's the case with anybody who becomes friends anyway. You are attracted to something in them, even if it's not as sort of dealt with in as mercenary a way as that. So I quite enjoyed that, because I think it would have been really easy to go down the sort of rom-com route, and they don't do that. What Rosie Price is exploring is something much more interesting in relationships, I believe. You know, and it sort of spans from there into their adulthood, their circumstances changing and so on and so forth, and that's really, really nicely handled and dealt with. And you know, she manages to pull it off as well, so that you never feel like you're missing out on anything. I know sometimes when you're reading a novel and you know, or you suspect that the characters are going to get together at some point, you're sort of willing them on, and sometimes an author will do things like where they'll delay that gratification of the two characters coming together, particularly in book series. You know, you're thinking, when is it actually going to happen? But in this, you don't miss them not getting together, because actually what their relationship is far more interesting. What's also really nice is there's a lovely relationship with Max's mother, Zara, who is a film director. They're both studying film in the book, you see, and Kate sort of becomes close to her when she realises that Max's mother is someone she admires and has heard of. You know, she's quite a famous kind of arty director. And then anyway, when she comes to discuss her sexual assault, basically, without revealing who it is, that's sort of peppered throughout the book. The two women find common ground and are able to sort of, I don't want to say lean on one another, because that's not how it's dealt with, but in some ways recognise a similarity of experience, or a kind of shared history, be that, you know, near history or far history when it comes to Zara's character. And actually, although the circumstances were different, they're able to bond over the commonalities of that experience. Now, you know, I say that experience, what I mean is the rape, basically. Both characters are raped, and what this book does really nicely as well is deal with that humongous topic in a way that doesn't sensationalise and then forget about it. You know, oftentimes you'll see things like that and then it's very just sort of pushed to the side, whereas what this book looks at is the ramifications of what it is to be assaulted, and how that manifests throughout your life, how it colours your experience of things, how it permeates, I suppose, into every aspect of your life, and how you begin to see things through a prism, I suppose, or refracted through that experience, which, you know, gives the book its title, What Red Was. I'll just read you a little passage that sort of sums up that title and what that's about. So this is Kate's perspective. Time flatlined. She knew then what red was. She was on Zara's bed. She saw the ribbon in his collar. But this red was not a colour, a warning sign or provocation, the bull's rag, no. Red was the filter through which she apprehended everything. It collapsed the time between her present and that moment that refused to remain in her past, so that her whole being, from the dilation of her pupils to the rhythm of her breath and the ice in her chest, recalibrated to respond to the sight of the world through it. And she saw then that if she had been so wrong about what a colour could be, then there was little about the world that she had understood correctly. And I just think that really sort of sums it up. And that's, you know, Rosie Price doesn't often dip into, you know, the sort of metaphysical or the sort of explanatory in you know, she's very much a show don't tell author, which I appreciate. So that's the kind of explanation, and then when you go forward and see Kate's experiences as we move forward, then it makes sense. You've got that kind of, oh, okay, this is what I'm reading, this is what I'm looking at, this is how she, the character, is experiencing it, and therefore I now recognise her actions through what red was. Hopefully that makes sense. So yeah, that's handled really nicely. The relationships are lovely. I think there's also a really interesting thing about, you know, the wider community or the wider circle when it comes to issues like this, in terms of, there's a wonderful, wonderful bit that I found quite brave in some ways, where Kate talks about how, because she's very quiet for a long time, it takes her, you know, and completely understandably so, it takes her a long time to talk about what happened to her, and she does that in sort of dribs and drabs as to what she's willing to reveal when she feels able to do that. But she talks a lot about how she wants, in some ways, people to share this burden, because she wants that collective kind of responsibility that feels like it's on her shoulders at the moment, that she's had to shoulder all of this, and she almost wants other people to have to share it with her, although she recognises how painful that is. But and you know, there is something in that. There's something about, I believe, there's something about wanting other people to be, not complicit, that's the wrong word, but involved, so that you're not having to carry this kind of suitcase of emotions on your back without someone to go, actually, I have to carry that too, so here's a helping hand. And also, I suppose, in a way that's, not that the character would express it like this necessarily, or that anyone would on a conscious level, but there's something about, I guess, collective responsibility as well for the culture in which these things happen. You know, and the sense of who is... She comes to a point where she sort of says to Zara, you know, this thing that happened, it's for him to take responsibility for, not for me. And that's right, but actually, while I'm not saying that an assault is anybody's fault but the perpetrator of the assault, there is something about, in this book, the culture around him that has allowed it to happen, so that he doesn't even perceive what he's done as assault. I hope that makes some sort of sense. It's, yeah, it's difficult. These issues are all wrapped up inside one another, and you know, they're part of a much wider conversation than it might first seem apparent, I suppose. And that's what Rosie Price lets you do. She sort of walks you through it, but allows you to have these thoughts about it. While ostensibly also writing a kind of, I guess, contemporary examination of what class and experience looks like in a circumstance whereby we're frequently told that class no longer exists, and that we rub up against people, to coin a phrase, of all different social classes in our world. You know, I mean, I suppose the world in some ways is less delineated on a day-to-day practical level than it might have been in the past in terms of who you mix with and stuff. But actually, it's also saying that those structures are still there, and what they actually do is not just affect material possessions, what you have, but also your entire approach to life, what you believe is possible, what behaviours are acceptable, what your outlook is, what are your expectations, what do you dare to believe is possible, you know, based on where you came from. And it's almost like, in some ways, this sort of chain reaction of events is set in motion many years before the novel begins, and then these two bodies, Max and Kate, who I guess in some ways stand in for those two classes, are pushed up against one another, and what happens next spirals out from that. So I think that's really interesting. Perhaps I'm reading too much into it, but that's what I took from it. I would also like to comment very briefly as well on the ending, which I really appreciated. I'm not going to spoil it, but what I will say is that there is no clear-cut conclusion to either the story or any of the issues and preoccupations that Kate has as a result of what happened to her. You know, there's no sort of, and then she was fine, because, you know, that's not, without wishing to overshare, that's not what it's like. You know, in some ways, we have the idea that for the rest of her life, at least a little bit of her peripheral vision will be red. She will see things through what red was, you know, and I think that's true to a greater or lesser extent of all of us. You know, we don't exist in vacuums, and we're just assimilating constantly and altering our behaviours and switching them up, and you know, as children do when they first start to learn with schemas about theory by Jean Piaget, about how the world works. We have to constantly assimilate new information, even as adults. So yeah, this is, I would sum this up as a family kind of saga with, you know, deep roots, and how those roots blossom positively or negatively in the most current generation of those families, I guess. That's probably waffle, but that's what I took from it. I really liked this, which sounds weird to say that of a book of this kind of content and, you know, severity. So, and I did want to make it very plain from the start that if those things are difficult, those subjects are, you know, potential triggers for you that are not going to put you in a good place mentally or emotionally, approach with caution. But, you know, alternatively, if you think you're able to handle that and to assimilate that without any detrimental effect, then I have no hesitation whatsoever in recommending this. I'm very excited to see what Rosie Price writes next, because this is just a fantastic debut novel. I will have missed loads in discussing this as normal, but they are the points that felt very pertinent, and what a welcome surprise it is when something you were already looking forward to becomes so much more than what you expected it to be, you know, reading adventures. So that's What Red Was by Rosie Price. And that's it for this episode. So put your library cards somewhere nice and safe. Do give this video a like if you enjoyed it. If you're new here, hi, how are you? Give me a subscription. Give me a subscribe if you haven't already, or don't. That's entirely up to you. But thank you for sharing that with me. Drop me a comment below if this sounds like something you might enjoy, or something you wouldn't, or anything that this reminds you of, or, you know, just any comment you'd like to make about what you're reading at the moment, if you're not reading at the moment, you know, or just what are you up to? Are you having a nice cup of tea? Let mine go half cold now, but I'm beggared if I'm wasting it. So without further ado, the library is closed, my darlings, and I will see you in the next video, hopefully very soon. Much love and take care of yourselves. Mwah.